Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to I'm Spiritual But, a one-of-a-kind talk show creating a new global conversation about inclusive spirituality. Whether you're religious or not religious, this show seeks to inspire you to discover your own unique spiritual experience. And now, here is your host, award-winning author and actress, Anne Scottlin.
Hi, welcome back to I'm Spiritual But. So happy to have you tuning in here live again today for our spiritual talk show, talking about inclusive spirituality and what it means to listen, to understand the differences of those around us, and how can you take your spirituality to the next level. This isn't a formula. This isn't a guide. It's sharing each person's individual spiritual experience as we visit with our amazing guests and learning what their journey has looked like and learning what can bring hope and encouragement to you or to those around you. So thank you again so much for tuning in. And please, it's a live show, so please send us your comments and questions. We'd love to respond to as many of those as we can during the show. So a quick announcement as well. So next week in this time slot, come check out a brand new show that I'm also hosting, and it is called Global Socialpreneurs. So this is a interview talk show just like we've been doing here, and it's about helping people create for-profit sustainable social enterprises. How can you create a social program, make an impact, but create it in a for-profit way that makes it more sustainable over time? Doesn't mean you do it to get rich. It means you do it so that money can go back in to the program that you're passionate about and or even contribute income to the founders. So it's a really exciting topic. It's very cutting edge. It's a big on the global stage and a great, exciting conversation. We're going to have amazing guests and social entrepreneurs who have been doing this for a long time and are sharing their secrets and expertise and stories in their field. So join us next week for Global Socialpreneurs. But first, I want to introduce today's very special guest here on I'm Spiritual But. And he's not really a stranger at all. You're going to know a second you see him. It's Dr. Roger Leslie again, and I'm just going to introduce him again in case you didn't meet him earlier in the show. He's an author, teacher, librarian, professor. He's a book reviewer, writing coach, editor, publisher, public speaker, talk show host. And this is really, all of these items have fulfilled his passion to inspire people to live the life they dream and empower them to know and trust their own soul. And he was my co-host when we started this show. So I'm super excited to welcome you back, Roger Leslie.
Hi, Anne. Great to see you again.
Good to see you. Let's see if I can get my talking going straight here this morning. How are you?
I'm doing fabulously. How are you?
I am good as well. I am so good. So, we have had so many amazing guests since you were here last on the show. I'm Spiritual But. But you're a good old friend, or my co-host. So anything new and exciting in your own life that you'd like to share before we really get started, or what's going on?
So I wanted to just mention a little bit about this fabulous journey. You approached me about doing this show in the fall, and everything came together so naturally and so fluidly. I knew that was a sign from Spirit that it was something to do. So we did it, we embarked on it, and I loved it. What I thought I was applying for mostly was just co-hosting. I learned early on that there's so much backstage work to be done. And when that showed up, something inside me intuitively told me this might not be the best fit for me. And that's when you and I discussed it, and I decided to bow out of the show after the first 2 months. So I just want to encourage your listeners and the viewers to listen to that still small voice. The more you stay in tune with it, the easier it is to respond correctly to it. You know, people would say, well, were you disappointed that you didn't stay with the show? Did things fall apart or anything? I said, no. It became clear from the beginning that I was meant to start it. It became clear early on that I was meant to bow out, and everything with you and the producer and everyone connected to it were so gracious and so kind. It was a very fluid moving in and a very fluid moving out. And it allowed me to do what I know I'm here to do, and that is to focus on my writing. So I encourage people, as they're making decisions, as they're thinking about what they want to do and how they want to do it, pay attention to that still small voice and heed it. It will always lead you in the right direction.
Amazing. And I love you use the word fluid, because so many times, even when we're doing something that's amazing or good or even exciting and something that we love, we can kind of stick to it, even when your gut, your spirit, whatever that is, speaks and says, it's not quite fully aligned at this point in time. And for you, you had a brand new book to launch too and to finish. So that was really exciting that you were able to get the time to do that. So, and in the meantime, we have blessed so many people with this show, people who have called in and wrote in, and how this has made such a great impact on them. And they've loved this really unique, one-of-a-kind conversation where we're not trying to convince anyone or change anyone, but just share from the heart our own spiritual journeys, share what's working, and with some incredible people and leaders from all over the country and even the world. So we'll welcome you back, Roger, for today. And so, yes, I know what we're here today, especially to talk about the subject of your new book, because I think it's a subject that is sometimes awkward in spiritual conversations, at least in some religious circles. So we want to talk about, again, how can we listen, understand, be open, choose to see the world from a different point of view, and understand everyone's spiritual journey equally. So, Roger, go ahead and tell us about your book.
So the book is entitled Light Come Out of the Closet, and it is a memoir of my experiences from about the age 11 to 17. And people have asked me, why did you decide to revisit that stage in your life this far afterwards? And here's what happened, Anne. So I was raised in a very strict, moral, spiritual environment. I had great parents. I went to a parochial school and was taught many great things. However, from the very start, I knew I was gay. I didn't exactly know what that meant until I was a little bit older, but I sensed that something about me was different. And the messages that I kept hearing throughout my childhood is that if I am who I am, that suddenly negates all the good that I was doing. Because as a boy, I was a rule follower. I wanted nothing more than to please my parents, make them proud of me, and to do right by my teachers. And so everything that I was doing that defined my character seemed to be able to be swept away by virtue of the fact that I was born with a gay orientation. And so I struggled with that. And for years, after I let go of that religious background, I had painful memories of what that brought to me. And then more recently, I realized, perhaps there was a gift in there. Perhaps the religion of my youth gave me the moral foundation to be able to explore who I really am, to decide for myself what my spiritual journey is, and to find my own light and my own connection to spirit, the universe, God, whatever you want to call, well, however you identify it. And so I wrote this book in the spirit of thinking, I want to find out the gifts that this stage brought me, because for most of my life, I've remembered it as a very painful, dark period.
I hit mute twice and then it came back. So this is amazing. So the purpose of this book is what's the purpose of this book for others, for your readers? How do you envision this book serving in a particular way?
So, like my mission in life in general, this book is meant to empower
I think we
people.
lost him for a second. So when he comes back, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think he's reloading. There he is. He is. So Roger, I was just asking, so what do you envision this book doing for your readers? Like, what purpose do you hope it fulfills? Clearly, it was very therapeutic and useful for you to articulate your own journey. But what are you hoping people walk away with, or maybe even more than one message?
So, the theme of this book, like my mission in life, is to empower people to follow their own spiritual path, to trust their intuition, to listen to their own heart, and decide for themselves what's right for them. It's not about being gay or not being gay. It's about the spiritual journey and how we are faced with what feel like challenges at first, but those challenges are actually the gifts that empower us to move in the direction that spirit is leading us so we can fulfill our mission in life. And that mission is always good and always involves love.
I love that. I love that. So tell us a little bit more about the contents of the book.
So I trace my own experience of the messages that I was hearing from adults in my life during that time period. And everything I kept hearing kept telling me, oh, this is wrong. I'm doomed to hell. This is not going to work. I will never be loved. And that was the biggest part that led to the depression and some of the suicidal thoughts I had as a teenager. It's just like, if this is true of me, then I will never be loved. I will never be able to love or find love. And over the course of writing the book, I came to realize how I was choosing to notice certain messages and interpreting them in a way that felt hurtful. That people were not saying things intentionally to hurt me, but that's how I was interpreting them. As you may recall, Anne, we've talked in the past, I use the analogy of a prism, that I think the world is like a diamond, a prism, and each of us is looking at that prism from a different facet.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to make a change in our life, we must start seeing life from a different facet.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to perceive things in a way that other people might perceive them, or in different ways that we could perceive them. And so long as I stayed locked into that facet of I'm wrong, I'm doomed, everything that life is telling me is just fatalistic and awful, I kept spiraling down lower and lower and lower. And once I hit rock bottom emotionally, when I was in my mid-teens, that's when I realized, well, either I'm going to find a way out of this, I'm going to find some light, or I just need to end it all because there's no point in going on. That's when the light came through. And there's a big climactic scene at the end of the memoir that takes place in a church when I'm by myself. Something extraordinary happened to me in that moment that changed everything. It showed me the light. It showed me the source of the light, and it gave me hope to move forward, to move out of this downward spiral that I had created through my perceptions, and to create the life that I wanted, so that I can in turn be here to inspire other people to live the life they dream.
That's amazing, and such a beautiful philosophy. I can't even imagine how hard it must be, especially to be in a super conservative environment. And how did that affect your spiritual life early on? Like, we talked about how you felt, we talked about how you felt others might be judging, but how did you feel in your own soul, your own spiritual experience in an environment that alluded to you that something was critically wrong with you?
Well, I knew who I was, and I was seeing things on television, jokes, like cruel jokes that people would make about gay people. And many of them, because I was, just an adolescent or going through puberty, I didn't necessarily even understand them, but I felt the undercurrent of judgment, the undercurrent of negativity about them. And I kept thinking, well, that doesn't necessarily apply to me, because the extremes that I would see in media, in movies or on TV, I thought, well, I don't identify with being that particular personality type, and I'm not
Mhm.
attracted to that personality type. So I kept thinking, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe,
Mm.
maybe this isn't who I am. But I knew deep down I who I was, and who I was in the physical world seemed to be in direct opposition to who I was spiritually. And I couldn't get the two of them aligned until I had my big epiphany that is depicted at the end of the book.
Wow. I have other friends, and I came from an extremely conservative background as well, religiously. And I have other friends who, like, for example, who I was in very small religious high school with, who were gay but couldn't come out in that environment. I mean, we weren't even allowed to date the opposite sex in that environment in high school. So a really rigorous experience. So for those who had, even more to deal with than, I would say, the average person or the average teenager who realizes their orientation and really wants to come out, but is too afraid because of social and family pressures. When you add the really serious religious aspect, it makes it even heavier. And were you ever tempted to just walk away from God at that point before you had your breakthrough?
No, because I always had a good close relationship with God. I
Mhm.
just felt like I was always disappointing God.
Mm,
And another part of that disappointment is that I was brought up with all the advantages. I
mhm,
had a stable home life. I have loving parents.
mhm,
I was, I had great teachers. So every time I felt like my life wasn't what it could be and should be because of this circumstance, I felt guilty, because I thought, I have no reason to be complaining or feeling ungrateful. How unkind it is of me not to just be thankful to God for who I am. But
mhm,
part of who I was, everything around that kept saying, you're wrong, you're doomed to hell, this is the end, you don't deserve to be loved, you can't have what you're looking for, you'll never be a dad, you'll never, you'll never get married. Those are all misconceptions that I bought into, and many of them were self-created. I sort of put two and two together and got 10. I kept
mhm,
adding up little pieces and thinking, oh, that's what this means.
mhm,
And it was almost always fatalistic. It was like, oh my gosh, it became bigger and worse in my own mind than
mhm,
it probably was in life. But I never thought about abandoning God. I just was trying to understand how I could continue to have a relationship with God as I was. And that's what
mhm.
mattered most.
Wow. A couple comments here. One from Heather says, glad to see you again, Roger, and congrats on the new book. That is amazing. Thank you so much, Heather, for writing in. Any of the rest of you, too, if you have questions or comments, we'd like to share as many of those as we can on the show. So please send those in. So I'm going to take a gamble here, Roger, and say, because this is a show about inclusive spirituality, and we've had a lot of frank conversations with many guests on this show, you have been through many, many decades of challenges with organized religion's view, at least the organized religion you used to be in, but you still do go to your church. So how does that work for you now? How have you found a family, a Christian family that supports Christ's love for every single person?
So interestingly, I ended up marrying someone who was a Methodist minister, who had been a Methodist minister. He left the ministry and had gone back to school to become a teacher so he could spend time with his children during the summer. And we met in one of our education classes. My background was in Catholicism. His background was in Methodism. We wanted to find a place where we could be together and find a good spiritual home. We tried some Catholic churches. We tried some Methodist churches. We tried some churches in a box. There was this one church we went to. We called it the Greater Christian Church of the Holiday Inn because it met at a Holiday Inn hotel downtown. So we kept just trying churches. We thought we are going to find a place that's a good fit for us. And eventually we found Unity, Church of Christianity. And Jerry ended up actually becoming a minister at Unity of one of the local Unity churches, and was the senior minister there for 15 years.
Wow.
So I'm not promoting any particular religion or any particular denomination, but that was a good fit for us. We found something that worked for us. We felt included. And it wasn't an exclusively gay church, because that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for just an open, accepting, eclectic spiritual path that allowed us to continue our own journey and figure out where God was leading us individually and as a couple. And that was a good fit for us.
Wow. So as you know, I'm a Bible scholar myself. I've read many in sort of my own, what I might call deconstruction, so I could reconstruct my spiritual experience. Many books by academics and theologians about questions. His name is just eluding me, but there was a really good book that came out quite a few years ago. It was called Slaves, Women, and Homosexuals. And it evaluated the biblical treatment, in particular Old Testament treatment of women, of slaves, and of people who were perceived to be gay. And it was incredibly good book. It's very heavy reading, but because it took 3 views on each case. So there was a liberal view, a middle view, and a conservative view. And it was a really educational way to, regardless of how a person is approaching this topic from their religious experience, there was sort of an outcome in each of those discussions they could pick from, if you will. It was very thoroughly done in a very academic way. So everybody's going to have a different opinion. If you believe that scripture is absolutely literal, divinely word by word, then there's a lot of things I would challenge people that they're not doing. So if they want to go back and read it, I was a Christian who used to keep Saturday as my worship day. So I know how specific the Bible is and what it says you must do. So, we can't pick and choose. What I see as Christ's message, Jesus' message to the world, Christian, non-Christian, Jewish. He was Jewish, by the way. When Christ's message to the world was one of love and inclusivity, and a message to me that really resonates with so much of what the past legislated in thousands of years ago in a very different social environment, where procreation was critical, where safety was critical, where there were so many different impactful elements of an ancient civilization, ancient traditions, ancient religions. The Jews, obviously, and other religions had animal sacrifices, but that wasn't unique to Jewish religion at all. That was very common in many religions in that day, in Mesopotamia, Persia, Babylonian, depending on when you were looking. So having this mindset, I feel like, Jesus kept saying, if something makes sense and you're not hurting anyone else, then why not do it? When his disciples were hungry and they're walking through a field of grain and they're really, really hungry, like tummy's growling because it's the Saturday, which used to be the holy day, right? Before Christians made it Sunday. And the disciples were hungry. And when some of the holy men, the priests, saw them eating, corn or whatever it was, and feeding themselves, they were just like, that is not okay. You're breaking the Sabbath. This is terrible. And Christ says, he says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath day. In other words, he said, leave my guys alone. The Sabbath, in that context of that culture at that time, was a blessing, a gift of rest, to spend time with family, to ponder God, for humans to benefit from. It wasn't that the Sabbath had been made first in this discussion, and then humans had to conform to something that already existed. It was actually a gift to humans. Humans weren't being sacrificed to the Sabbath. So that's just one of those illustrations from the Bible, from the New Testament, and there's so many more where if someone is open to looking at the spirit of the law instead of the letter of the law, you can find a gospel so much more filled with hope, so much more filled with love, with encouragement. And, my journey was very different from yours, Roger, but I wrestled with all of these things. I mean, agonized over these things. I mean, I got divorced. It was horrible. I didn't want it. It was the first time in either side of my family history anyone had been divorced. There was a lot of criticism from my religious spaces. But like you, I realized that sometimes I was amplifying the negative voices and not listening to the compassionate voices. So the stories that we tell ourselves was, my pastor of my church sat me down and said, even though this person is living multiple lives in multiple states and all these other abusive things, the only answer is reconciliation, stay married, have a relationship. And I found that so incomprehensible at the time. When I had laid it all out, like no one can argue with what I have here for my own safety, if nothing else, then still that was the answer. And my mind thought, what? I have kept every rule since I was a little kid. How is it? This is so not logical. I mean, no one would treat their pet dog this way. This is not how love and compassion shows itself. This is not how the Jesus I grew up understanding is. And then when I ended up visiting with a different spiritual leader that was on the fringes of the same organization, but a pastor in a more liberal church, I just remember sobbing and sobbing and sobbing in front of him at his desk because of the compassion that came through for human beings, for understanding. And, I used to be critical of divorced people because that's how I thought I should behave when I grew up in such a really conservative environment. All of a sudden, I'm one. And this is nothing compared to your story, Roger, but I had to learn empathy. And I'm like, wow, if I've been so critical of so many people that were just divorced, oh, they mustn't love God, oh, they mustn't try, they mustn't care, then who else have I been judging harshly? Because I knew in my soul I was making the right decision for survival, for the wellness of my body, mind, spirituality. So I'm like, who else have I been critical of that I need to reconsider? And it really started opening. Who can I show love to? Not to fix them, just to love them. So I share this, and Roger's the guest today, but I just felt like I wanted to open up my own heart because it always makes me very emotional too about how it feels when you're discriminated against, and in my way, a very small way, really, compared to so many other issues. And how important that love was. I would have ditched God altogether. I tried to be an atheist for a year and I just couldn't do it. So I needed a God who could show compassion and love, and realize that I wasn't broken. Life just goes on. I'm not broken. I'm not damaged. I dated a guy briefly around that time, very briefly after my divorce, that was all about dating, thought that was great. And then whenever we talked about something serious, like, oh, maybe getting more serious or engaged or anything like that, he's like, oh, no, I can't marry you. You're divorced. And he was very sincere about that. And so, take all the benefits, but then like, oh, but you're dirty goods. I can't be associated with that. So coming through those experiences really changed and shaped me, who I am, and made me a more compassionate person. So I'm sure you have so much more to say. That I'm done, but I thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Well, you bring up perfect points, because the whole point of this show when we put it together was all about the individual spiritual journey. What you just shared is an example of everything that we are doing in relation to other people is only a reflection of what's going on inside of us. Yeah. If we're judging other people, it's because we're judging ourselves. If we are loving and compassionate to other people, it's because we are learning how to be loving and compassionate with ourselves. So, when I see people who are doing things that are cruel or unkind to other people, I don't feel threatened by them, because my perception is, and this is just a perception, from the facet of the prison that I'm seeing the world. But my perception is that person is that miserable inside him or herself as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're lashing out, they're being cruel to other people. But when they go home and they're by themselves, they are just as miserable as they are in that public forum where they're being cruel to other people. And then you see other people who are loving and kind and generous and are all doing altruistic things all the time. That's a mindset, and that's a discipline that requires regular practice. It isn't like we can just be altruistic and kind sometimes and then just forget about it and then go back to, just being very self-indulgent. It's a daily practice. And so I think about, what daily practices I'm engaged in and where is that leading me? And the key is always, am I being loving? And how do I learn to be loving in relationship with myself? Because when I fill my own pitcher, eventually that water just overflows and it's easy to be loving to other people. Moms are notorious for emptying their pitcher, taking care of others, and often forgetting to refill the pitcher themselves. Mm-hmm. Eventually, they've got nothing left to give and they're worn out and they're tired and they need to replenish. That's not just true of moms. Fathers are that way. Parents are that way. Mm-hmm. Many of us are taking care of aging parents. So even children are going through similar relationships like that. But the key is to have a good relationship with ourselves and to work on that regularly and daily. One thing that I share with some of my coaching clients and some of the courses that I teach on self-actualization, have practices that you do daily. For example, my practice is, I call it getting into the pew, P-E-W. Every workday, I pray, I exercise and write, P-E-W. I get into the pew. I know I've had a good workday every time when I think back and I thought, okay, did I get into the pew? Have I prayed? Have I exercised? And have I written? Because prayer takes care of my soul and my heart, exercise takes care of my body, and the writing leaves my legacy to the world. So think about what practices you engage in as you go through your daily life. What are you doing regularly to take care of yourself, to build a good relationship with whatever you believe spiritually? And where is that leading you? Because it will ultimately always end up leading to taking care of other people as well, which is why I think we're here together.
I love that. That's so true, and such good advice, and such a worthwhile thing to think about each day. How do we live each day, and are we filling the elements that are really critical to our well-being, both to ourselves, taking care of ourselves so we can take care of others. And I have just will say briefly too, when you talk so briefly about people who are critical or people who are judgmental, people who are unkind to others who maybe aren't the same as themselves, which, by the way, nobody is the same as anybody else. So what? Anyway, I think they do suffer. I agree with you. They suffer a lot because if a philosophy or theology of thinking that you've chosen to adopt conflicts with your gut instincts as a loving human being, you will suffer greatly. If you know that you should be compassionate and loving, but you decide not to because you live by a set of rules that doesn't permit that acceptance, non-judgmentalism, then you do suffer because you are living as a victim of your own conscience as opposed to some written rules from long ago, which is why my relationship with God is so very personal for me. And you can give yourself the litmus test. You're like, well, I'm accepting, I'm not judgmental. Well, when the question is, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to the critical and uncomfortable questions, what is your most compelling energy? Is it to be right and justified? Because that's a painful energy. Or is it to be loving and compassionate? Because that's an energy that will fill you and warm your soul and warm the spirit of the people around you. So that's the litmus test. If it's critical, judgment, I'm right, you're causing yourself a lot of pain. If it's open, compassion and love always come first, the rest is secondary, then you're expanding yourself. You're expanding your own spiritual experience. You're expanding for more connection with spirit, whatever that is for you. to really click in and live a more abundant spiritual life. So I really appreciate you sharing that about, the people who cause hurt are just as important as the people who get hurt. And sometimes
Yes.
we don't think about that, but I know you do because you're Roger and you're my friend, and we have a lot of things like that in common. So we only have a couple minutes left, sadly. Any other takeaways you would like to share for gay people in Christian communities, for Christians who have a traditional lifestyle, who are trying to decide how to interact with people not like themselves? What is one or two of your takeaways that you would like to leave people with today, Roger?
So I'm really of the mind that if we are living a loving life and we are doing our best, the best we can, we gravitate toward people who are doing the same thing, who are on the same spiritual journey or at a similar space in that spiritual journey. And we can support each other and love each other through that. So it all comes down to having a relationship with ourselves and then acting out of love in relation to other people. To be contentious is to try to draw from other people some kind of acceptance or acknowledgement that is misspent, because we don't need other people's acknowledgement and support until we have it in ourselves. Once we make peace with that in ourselves, whether you're a straight person, a gay person, somewhere in between, whether you're figuring out who you are, whether you're an ultra religious person, whether you are completely, devoid of any religious upbringing or religious background, but you feel some kind of spiritual tug, I think it's all the same journey. I think we're just all interpreting it and identifying it with different symbols. So pay attention to the symbols that show up in your life and follow your own guidance and trust that what your soul is telling you is the right thing for you. And kind of to piggyback on the last comments you made, it's important to distinguish, I think, it's important to distinguish between judgment and discernment. Discernment is just being selective about what we think and how we process it. Judgment is finding fault with something and rejecting something based upon very little knowledge. So to say, we could all be open and accepting to everything leaves us very vulnerable, which is not necessarily the best place for us to be either. But rather than judge, if we can discern and decide, okay, this is not a good journey for me, but my journey doesn't have to match anybody else's in the world. If this is their journey and this is how they're learning their lessons in life, then so be it. Let me love them through it. Let me support them through it, which is what most of us parents do with our kids. They make decisions and we think, well, I have had some life experiences that would lead me to think that wasn't a good decision to make. But we all have to learn our own way at our own pace. So to be discerning is to determine for ourselves what's best for us, not to exclude or judge other people for doing it differently, but to honor them and say, that's your journey. That's your particular route toward enlightenment. It may not be mine, but I'm too busy working on myself to judge you for how you're doing your journey. And that's the biggest one of all. We are working on ourselves at all times. That's what this life, I believe, is all about.
So beautifully said. Thank you so much, Roger. So lovely to have you here today. And I hope our listeners appreciate that. We've really put our heart and soul into this conversation. And I hope that people will go away with the willingness to think, to broaden your perspective, to live life more generously, not financially per se, but with your attitudes, with your behavior, with your willingness to love and comfort and support others, and checking out the mote in your own eye, if you know that phrase, before you look at the beam. And saying your brother has a mote in your eye, that's what it is, and a beam in your own. So we hope this has really been useful. We hope you take away lots of ideas for improving your own spiritual walk, whatever that looks like. And always reach out. Always know you're never alone. Always know that there are others out there who share your background, who share your situation, your philosophy, your orientation, whatever that is. There are others out there and they want to help you, because those of us who are dedicated to a spiritual system that's built on love, we are there for you. We are there to encourage you, support you, and we welcome you in. So reach out, ask. Ask is my word for 2023. As I said before earlier, a few weeks ago, ask. And you can always reach out to me. You can always reach out to Roger if you have any questions or looking for any direction. We'd be more than happy to help. So thank you again for being here today on I'm Spiritual But. An amazing, amazing episode today. And please join me next week because I'm going to be back and we are going to have, I'm also starting this brand new show called Global Socialpreneurs. And this is about taking our love and compassion actively on the ground. How can we create sustainable impacts, social impact, environmental impacts in our world? How can we find ways to create for-profit social initiatives that are more sustainable over time and that even allow those who found them to get paid if it's run like a business? That's what's exciting, running a social enterprise, running a social initiative as a business. And again, a hot topic right now, so I'm going to jump on that bandwagon. Join me here next week and we will be talking about global socialpreneurs, and we're going to have a phenomenal guest you're not going to want to miss. I promise you on that. You are not going to want to miss. So please tune in. That's going to be 12 noon Eastern and 9 a.m. Pacific. Be well and love your neighbor.